This is Vocatio. We like to record conversations about Christian calling for college students. And we've been talking about vocation for quite some time with our Trinity students. This has been something that's been really central to the curriculum at Trinity College because we've seen how the doctrine of vocation can really serve young people with getting guidance and clarity about their future. If people can grasp what is my calling, then it can provide for them a great deal of confidence in terms of going forward with what they believe that God has called them to do. And that may change over time. You may add callings to your life over time, get married, have kids, get involved in the church leadership position, something like that. But just in order to take a next step, I'm thinking about how many young people we've seen who have been helped with their confidence and clarity by getting a clear sense of vocation. And so I'm curious to think about your experience with that. And there's kind of two different ways this can go, because we could ask about, when did you first begin to understand the doctrine of vocation and see that this was beneficial? But I think for most people, that comes actually much later than the doctrine typically comes to them later than the actual experience of walking forward into a vocation. So let's start with that part. When did you first become aware of God's calling to different facets of your life?
Right. Well, I was probably a little unusual in that I felt calling from the Lord to be a missionary at probably age 6 or something like that, right? So I had this very strong sense of calling, and then I definitely had a hard time.
Did you have a calling to a place or something?
For a while, it was India, because I had read A Chance to Die by Elizabeth Elliot about the missionary Amy Carmichael to India. But I think that it was always very kind of uppermost in my mind. What is my calling? What are my callings? What has God called me to?
So you were thinking about that terminology then from a very young age, is what you're saying?
Yes, I might not have used the word calling, but what am I going to be when I grow up? Right. I knew I wanted to be a wife and a mother, but I thought for a long time that it was going to be serving on the mission field, until I, in my teen years, got an understanding of how God had called me to my local church and the difference I could make there for the world. I could be a world changer right where I was, not needing to move somewhere else to do that. And in fact, that's where God had called me, was to really give my life to my local church. But I remember, I think one of the things that I'm so grateful for is that my mom was really intentional. We use that word a lot. She was really deliberate to make sure that my sisters and I were serving and we're learning and we're developing our gifts and using those in the context of the local church from a very young age. And so I think one of the most important things for college students about vocation that they often miss is the faithful in little, faithful in much concept. Right. And I think it's really interesting to me how many of my future callings grew out of things that I was doing at a very young age, late teens, early 20s. God was preparing me for all kinds of things, even as he was using me. But a lot of times people tend to kind of think that a calling is the same thing as a career. We've been very conditioned by post-industrial ideology. And so young people today are kind of all mixed up about this. But I think that the faithful in little, faithful in much, when we're looking, what is God calling me to? Well, we don't know necessarily at this point. Some people do. Some young people have a real sense of clear sense of calling. I know I didn't. I mean, once I realized I wasn't called to be a missionary, spent a number of years not sure where exactly God was going to take me, and that became clear when I met you. But I think what I love about the faithful in little, faithful in much approach to this is that it's really exciting, because God is doing something right now. If you work at Chick-fil-A, he's doing something with that. And when you're faithful, he does all kinds of things with that in your life, in other people's lives, that you just don't expect, and you look back later. And so I think we have like story after story like that. right? I started volunteering at the church office, just doing administrative tasks. I answered phones, I stuffed envelopes back when you did that. You would send out mass mailings instead of email. So I am really old, but I would do a lot of mundane tasks. And I did that for years. Eventually, they hired me because I knew how things worked around there. So I was a full-time employee, and that's how I met you. That's how I got to know you, as you were in the pastor's college. It met in the same building. So it's like I didn't know that God was preparing me to get to know my future husband. That was just one of the things he was doing in those times. I've since had, right now we run a school, in addition to you running Trinity College, I run a school for middle school and high school students. All of that experience administrating things has really come in handy, because I know how to get through paperwork and organize things, and it requires a lot of organization. So, but I think that realizing that faithfulness in those things, actually, it was really funny because I'd been doing this for a number of years. I don't know. I was maybe 20, 21. I don't remember. Been working at the church, doing full-time administration, and one of the pastors really helpfully sat me down, and he looked at me and said, "I don't think administration is your primary gifting. I don't think it's your primary calling." And I was like, "So what am I doing with my life?"
Right. Oh, man.
And he said, "I think that it's writing, and I think that you should focus more on your writing." And that was also this pivotal moment in my life. But I was his employee. He very helpfully sought to, as a pastor, he was concerned for all the young people in the church. He was meeting with a lot of them and trying to help them understand vocation. And so I was just one of those students that he was like, hey, I think you need to refocus here. And obviously, I didn't know that I would have the privilege of helping my mom write books in years to come. So that's a lot of detail. All that to say, all of these big things in my life, or these big pieces of my calling, have grown out of something small, and just being faithful to say, "Lord, what do you want me to do now?" And so I think that's really exciting for college students to think about the kind of preparation. So I don't know. I mean, I know for you, we've talked about this a lot. A lot of things that you've done that have not been very fun or seemed like a waste of your time have actually turned out to be really significant. Helpful in your callings.
Well, and just hearing your story reminds me of a couple of things. One of the things I appreciate about your story is that you are doing a lot of things, and that the Lord used the doings to guide you. And I remember at some point somebody telling me, "You can't steer a parked car." And I remember that, well, duh, that makes so much sense. And so, but applying that principle to young people and vocation is get busy. Get serving your church, get serving other people, just say yes to lots of opportunities, right? Go on a short-term mission trip, serve, because, and I'll come back to the thing you're talking about there in a second, but the thing that strikes me about your story is that, so you did a lot of stuff. You said yes. And you were moving, and the Lord sort of used that movement to vector you in, like, okay, not this, this. And, but then there was also that conversation with the teacher. And I think it's interesting how often our sense of calling can be confirmed or clarified by other people. And part of that was my experience too. When I was converted, I started following the Lord seriously in college, and transferred colleges because I wanted to be closer to home and get discipled by my dad and be a part of my home church where my family was. So I left the college I was at 4 hours away, and I transferred to a college that it was 1 mile door to door from the front door of the church.
Let's just say not many students do that.
Well, they could
back home and go to a local college. That's impressive.
That was, top 5 best decisions I've ever made for sure. But it allowed me to do a number of things. One thing that happened that fall, almost as soon as I'd done it, is my senior pastor grabbed me one Sunday and he said, "Hey, we've got this youth event that we do every Saturday night, and I need somebody to administrate it. I want you to run it. Here's what I want you to do." He's like, he just said, I want to show up, talk to people, preach, eat some snacks, talk to people, go home. I want you to handle everything else." Sure. Okay, I can do that.
You were like, what, 19?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, 19 probably. Yeah, 19, maybe 20. No, 19, yeah, probably. And so I said, sure, I can do that. And I didn't even appreciate it at the time. I mean, he was taking a big risk because this thing could have just crashed and burned. But it could have really, I mean, it could have been a huge administrative train wreck. But a lot of stuff was already going. So I took that over. And in the spring, after I'd been doing 6 or 8 months, he calls me into his office and he said, you may not realize this, but I did that because I wanted to just see how you do. And I see leadership gifts. I see how you formed a team. You roped in other college students. You motivated the high school students to start serving in different ways. And he said, I think that might mean that you have a calling to pastoral ministry in your life. And that was not something I'd ever thought about.
Wow.
I mean, maybe I thought about it, but it wasn't something I was on track for a college and career, and was studying chemistry at the time and thought I'd be a high school chemistry teacher, which did end up happening, sort of, 1 year.
You did.
But what's interesting about that for me is it overlaps with your story. Was there was the input from a wise, trusted, older Christian who, in both of our cases, knew us well enough to see where God had gifted us and to think out ahead about where might the Lord want to use that in the church.
Right.
And and that
we're trying to return the favor that those men did for us.
Yeah,
and our parents.
And for me, it's different because you had been thinking about all these things from a very young age, and I was more like on autopilot in the sense of I went to a public school, and so we went to we had a career
program.
we had a career counselor's office that we would go down to, and you would take this test, and like, what do you like to do? What are you good at? And it would spit out for you results and mine was always like, you should be an engineer. You should. I thought, so whatever. We thought, I guess I'll be an engineer, and was on track to do that when God redirected me to this other university that didn't have engineering. So I think it's pretty remarkable looking back how the Lord used just things used pushing on open doors, used activity, doing stuff, always be moving forward. And that was part of it for me too, my willingness to serve that he asked, and I was sure, I'll be happy to serve. I would love to do that. Right. And then the input. But the thing that you said about things you don't expect, like being faithful in little, I think you're thinking there of a story that we talk about sometimes from when I was in seminary. In my PhD program, we would have a weekly gathering with all the PhD students, no matter what department you are in. So Old Testament guys, church history guys, I was in New Testament. They would all come together. We would have good coffee and good cheese and sometimes good discussion. The discussions were often very stimulating. But one of the things I loved is they would have in these guest speakers. And so they had in this theologian named Robert Yarbrough, Bob Yarbrough. And I have several of his commentaries, and I've read stuff from him before. And he was much more down to earth than I expected. And one of the things he said is, he was over Zoom, so he didn't exactly look me in the eye, but I felt like it. And he said, don't despise the things you're doing right now that you don't see an outcome for. Right. He said, because God is in control of these things. God has sent these things, and it's never for nothing. Right. That this stuff, God uses these things. And that was real encouraging to me at the time, because I had just started I just started getting clear on what I wanted my dissertation to be on. And I realized that there was a fair amount of coursework that I had done that was kind of peripheral to this. And if I had known earlier, I could have focused my coursework a little bit more deliberately, maybe even use that time to get some chapters done. I hadn't done that. So I felt behind the curve. I felt like maybe I'd wasted a couple semesters. And so that came at just the right time to speak to that discouragement, but also to help me be willing to invest myself in things that I didn't see an immediate payoff for.
Right.
So I found that really helpful.
Yes. I think we say it all the time. I think that one piece of advice was the one truth that got you through seminary.
It helped so much.
Because we had 4 kids, 2 newly adopted from Ethiopia. Right.
I was working full-time seminary.
Right. And it was an intense season, but I just saw such a change in your faith and in your joy, and thus in your like stamina and
Mhm.
your
Yeah, that's really
ability to study hard and move through the material, when you got a clear sense of God is calling me to something right now, and none of this is a waste.
Right. Right.
Even though it appears we live in such a utilitarian society, and don't get me started on Jeremy Bentham and the utilitarians. But
Here we go.
But we live in such a utilitarian society that honestly, that whole idea, that whole thread of philosophy is really not often in line with God's word
Mhm.
and how He works in our lives. And so
Right.
it cuts us off when we won't do something because we don't see an immediate payoff.
Right.
We tend to just dismiss it, skip it, quit.
Mhm.
Okay, this isn't
Mhm.
really doing for me what I thought it would do.
Right. Right.
I'm not getting as much out of this class as I thought I would,
Yeah.
so I'm going to drop it. I'm not really liking this job so much. It's not giving me opportunities like I wanted,
Right.
so I'm going to quit. I think that's a common problem with young people. They don't have an understanding of what to expect about what God's doing
Mhm.
in what they're doing right now. So they think they're supposed to be moving on, when
Mhm.
actually
Mhm.
a lot of times they're supposed
Yeah.
to be persevering.
Right.
That doesn't
Right.
mean, again, we don't move on to a new job when it's clear it's time. We don't, even drop classes. We should always be reevaluating. And you know how I love to reevaluate. This is what God's calling me to
Sure,
do
love
right
language.
now.
Yeah.
So I don't want to stray so far that we just put our head down and just wherever we are, we just do it. But I think, I was, not to go off topic a little bit, but I was copying down a line from C.S. Lewis that I saw the other day. I was copying it down this morning, and I am going to butcher this, but basically he was talking about how relying on God is something that we have to do each morning,
Mhm.
as if we had never done the work before, as if we'd never practiced it before. And so I might even have said this recently on this podcast, but that thought has remained with me a number of days. So we can't just stick our head down, not rely on the Lord, rely on our own strength to do something. But with a sense of expectancy, we need to
Mhm.
dive into the menial, mundane, seemingly pointless work
Yeah.
of today,
Right.
and look expectantly for what God is going to do with that.
Yeah.
Because He's working all kinds of character.
Right.
He's giving you all kinds of experiences that are going to help you later. And this is just we're old enough now that
Mhm.
we can look back on
Oh, yeah.
every kind
Oh
of
my goodness. Yeah.
season of our life and go, oh wow, if we hadn't had that, we wouldn't have been prepared for this.
Right.
We were talking, just even setting stuff up, certain aspects of running a college, you learned some of it being a furniture salesman and
Mhm.
running furniture stores.
You wouldn't think that'd be a one-to-one transfer of skills from furniture sales to
Right.
college president, but
Not at all.
it's more of it than
but
you would think.
That's right. Right. So we could go on and on with stuff like that, with examples like that. I just
Yeah.
think that it's having a sense of expectancy, but not having a sense of your own expectations.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of having expectancy at what God's going to do, and holding on to that
Yeah.
real tightly, but
Mhm.
not holding on to your own expectations of what something is supposed to.
Right.
Well, this
Right.
didn't pan out as it was supposed to.
I think one way you could put that in a scriptural term.
Yeah, that'd be
is
good.
I think about the verse that we used to recite every day for the little school that I led. We would begin each day, Psalm 118:24. This is the day that the Lord has
Right.
made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it.
Yep.
And that thought that this is the day that the Lord has made.
Right.
That verb
Right.
made, it's a simple verb. It's a common verb in the Hebrew Old Testament. It's a word that suggests craftsmanship and care and attentiveness. And so I think it can help us with that sense that, yeah, exactly like you're saying, what is God going to do here today? But the thing you're saying about Jeremy Bentham and the utilitarians, so I'm not trying to get you started here, but it strikes me how we live in such a utilitarian age, so successful. I think their agenda has been so successful that some people watching this video might not even have as a super clear category, like, what do you mean utilitarian? And that terms like pragmatic or practical might be even more helpful for people to understand what Jeremy Bentham and co were about. They, these were guys who said, if you couldn't see a direct line to some practical payoff in a thing, don't do it. Then it's a lot of it was for them. Their ethics and morality was built around that. And as Christians, I think that we should. I hope the Lord, our Bible reading creates in us a built-in aversion to moral utilitarianism.
Right, exactly.
Because we
which
say,
is selfish and corrupt, really, at its end.
God has called us.
The places they ended up were really concerning.
The whole eugenics movement and everything like that. As Christians, we would say, well, look, God has called us to obey, even if the payoff is not obvious and immediate.
Even if the payoff is the exact opposite.
Death. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Martyrdom.
But then, weirdly, I think, especially modern American Christians, they might have that clear enough, but then jump to matters of vocation, of calling, of place in this world, and they jump,
get pseudo spiritual about the whole thing.
but jump right back into a pragmatism that is
both can happen.
You see where I'm going? Yeah. So they could be clear on their morality and their ethics, but then in their own personal guidance about their life, it's all in on pragmatism, and they think, well, and so, I know I've talked to many prospective students, and even more parents of prospective students for Trinity College, who their first question is, tell me, how does your program help my kid get a job? As if that were the main goal of college, is just to be employable. And it's frankly a pretty inefficient way to do it. If you just want to be employable and want a certain dollar figure, you don't need to invest 4 hours of your life to get a piece of paper that says you're now employable. I mean, that is actually how the system is set up.
4 years, I think you mean, but...
What did I say?
You said 4 hours, but 4 years.
World's
but
fastest
if only
college.
It was 4 hours.
4 years.
Everybody would do it.
There's other avenues that might be more efficient. But we live in a culture that says, this is the cultural expectation, is that you go pay your dues for 4 years, you get a certificate that says, now I can be admitted into the upper echelons of employment. Whereas before I was only qualified to be a cashier in retail or something like that.
But then you have a backlash now. I of a lot of big time successful businessmen. I saw an ad this morning, or an article where Warren Buffett says you don't need a college education to be successful. And so there's this whole, a whole backlash, I think, understandably, because the education system has let everybody down so spectacularly that now there's an understandable backlash. And we're actually not here saying, oh, every student must go to college, or that college itself is the calling of every young 18-year-old, right? Not at all. But rather, I think that there's a, and I'll use this word carefully, there's a practical godliness that the Puritans talked about, right? Which is it's contra the utilitarians, right? Which was just became a selfish pursuit. But the Puritans believed in a practical godliness, and that's something that we are trying to provide at Trinity. We have practical theology every week. Where we separate the guys and girls. We talk about what theology looks like, all the theology that they're getting in their classes on the person and work of Christ, and on biblical theology and hermeneutics. And we're helping them take all that they learn and say, okay, what does this look like in your life today? So Scripture is incredibly practical. It matters what you wear today and what you eat for breakfast,
right,
and where you go and what time you get up. Everything. Scripture reaches down into the details of our lives.
Yep.
So, but it does so in such a way that all is for the glory of God. There
Right,
is nothing
right.
better than that you would obey and fear Him,
Yeah.
is what it tells us in Ecclesiastes. So, I'm kind of moving this far away from where you had started.
Let me just add something to what you're saying, because in this, I think it's important to say, we have to at least say that in the same way that we affirm that not every student needs to go to college,
Right.
we're also not here saying like every student needs to come to Trinity College to be godly. We don't think that for a second.
Right.
And many students are going to be called to a 4-year degree at a secular institution or another Christian institution or something like that. What we're trying to encourage is students to recognize that if that's what God has called you to, not to buy into the utilitarian lie
approach
that
to
if
your
I
college
that
education,
if I pay X number of dollars in tuition, that will just inexorably lead to X number of dollars in income later as a professional, whatever it is. Because that's a lie that's been propagated by college marketing departments.
Right.
And so that sort of
Right.
straight line is that's what we're trying to appeal for is students to have a bigger vision for what God wants to do in their college, whether that's Trinity College or Behemoth State University, whatever it is. God wants to use this for you,
Right.
Because the utilitarianism would say, let's bypass as many of those gen ed classes as you can, and maybe you should, because you might not learn much there. But if you have to take a couple of those classes and it seems, it's a gigantic lecture hall and you feel like, kids are falling asleep around you, and you feel like, what am I really getting out of this? Well, it may be that the Lord is using that in something less pragmatic, less practical than you recognize. He's using it to shape your character. Will you persevere when something is boring?
Right.
Will you find the character within to take an interest in something that you've studied already, or that you don't feel like you need to know? Somehow you've seen into the future and you've assessed, I don't need this for my future. Like, how would you even know that?
Right.
But that the Lord may want to work character into you in that process, and that's not pragmatic. It's not utilitarian in the short term.
Right.
It's like you said, it's extremely practical in the long term, because God is shaping you into the kind of Christian that He wants you to be later. Because frankly, being a mom with small kids at times will be tedious and wearisome. Being you get a job and you're working in a cubicle somewhere, and that's going to be tedious and wearisome. And will you still attack that and run at that with the joy, that expectation of what is God going to do today? That's not a switch you can just flip on later. It's you begin becoming that person right now.
Right.
Start now. Start here.
Right. And I think you've very helpfully qualified it. I think, on the other hand, I will give a plug for what we're trying to do here. That we are trying to help young people, and again, wherever you are, and wherever God has called you, this applies. I think it could help to think about your these years as you want the Lord to increase your capacity. You want the Lord to increase your capacity for faithfulness, for endurance, for God's word, for prayer. You want Him to increase your stamina. The Bible just talks all the time, to pray for all endurance with patience and joy, right? So you're wanting to develop all of those things. So what we're seeking to give students is, okay, this is the time to expand your knowledge of Christ and His work in the world. And in His word.
That's right.
And we are going to study Christ. And then we're also going to learn how that applies to your daily life, and how that can help you to lead others and serve others, no matter what jobs you have throughout your life, no matter what callings you are called to. Right. So I think that trying to say, I want to be at the end of these 4 years a person with a greater heart for the Lord,
Yeah.
a greater capacity to love him, a greater stamina and endurance to be faithful, a greater, I want my mind stretched. I want my heart stretched. I want my skills stretched. I want to be the kind of person that can actually be prepared for any number of unexpected, exciting callings in my life. One of my favorite lines, I think it's Elizabeth Elliot, said that the will of God will always be quite different than what you imagined, but it will also be way more glorious than you ever imagined.
That. Yeah, that's a great
And
point.
I hung on to that as a young person, that it has taken, that is absolutely true. It has taken many unexpected twists and turns, and that's part of the excitement of following the Lord.
Yeah.
But it's always been greater and more glorious than I could have imagined. And this is what you want to use these years to be prepared for all of your callings,
right.
Not just one job.
Well,
because and go on there. I also we've had this experience watched a number of young people. In fact, like all the way from my friends all the way to now recently, I was hearing about another young person who, got his degree, was faithful, graduated. Now he's at work doing what he studied to do. And he's like, actually, this isn't quite as enjoyable as I thought it was going to be. And that is going to happen in a lot of cases. And so, he's reconsidering, some potential career moves in the future when he's able to. But if you have such a narrow vision of I'm just preparing for this one career, you're really gonna be impoverished, I think, when you come out of college, because you'll only be prepared for one thing that you maybe, if you view it that way. So wherever you are, if you view it as, no, I am using this time to prepare for all the callings God has in my life, to be a husband and father, or wife and mother, to serve the church, to know Christ. David Pallison says, get to know Jesus. Be prepared for all those things. Don't view college as just, I've got my track, I've got my career track, I can go play some Mario Kart, because I did my homework,
Right.
So, okay, sorry, you were going to say.
Well, I think that I love what you're saying, because I think the doctrine of vocation can serve people in so many ways there. And I think one thing it does is, in that situation, when somebody gets to the reality of the thing they've been longing for, and it just is, it's life in a fallen world. And so, you're in the workplace and you've got a quota you've got to meet, you got paperwork you got to fill out, you got meetings you're supposed to go to that are just, this could have been an email, this could have been less than an email. And
most careers are just a drag.
It's really true. And I think vocation helps both inside that and outside that. And outside that, what I mean is, a sense of vocation gives you a sense that I'm called to many things.
Exactly.
And I'm going to find a ton of delight. Like, okay, work is a thing. You know what? I'm called to do this. I'm called to be faithful to this, maybe to support my family, to be generous, to give to the church. And it may be that God has called you to do that so that you can just give your life away in other ways. And then outside your workplace, then God has called you maybe to disciple younger Christians. God has called you to go on a short-term mission trip, or God has called you just to serve faithfully in your church. Maybe you're just supposed to be a greeter at the front door most Sundays, and you're going to be the face that somebody encounters the first time they come to your church. And that might be the turning point for somebody. They're like, wow, I've come to other churches, nobody ever said hi. You said hi, and I'm here. And the Lord wants to use that. And I think then inside that calling, whatever that calling is that God has called you to, you get into it and you're like, meetings, my Monday sales meeting is, it's that one guy over there, so annoying. He's always talking about how great he is, and this lady's over here complaining, or it's, I think motherhood is fulfilling in so many ways. And then there's, it's just like more diapers and more stuff to clean and more cooking and over and over and over. It's, I've watched you and other moms just persevere in that. And I think what that sense of Christian calling does, it also transforms that experience.
Exactly.
Because it gives you eyes to see, like, if this is what the Lord has called me to do, I will rejoice. And I can actually, even though this is not the most fulfilling thing, I don't wake up each morning like, Yahoo, I get to go to work today. but the sense of calling transforms that to say, well, yeah, you get to go fulfill your calling today.
Right.
And this is what God has appointed to you, and he's going to meet
Right.
you in it.
Right.
And I think that could be, it's like for young people especially, I think the younger generation, even more so than our generation is a selfish generation, but the younger generation who has been raised on social media, I think they are much more prone to think a sense of self and personal fulfillment. And
Right.
I've had some conversations, especially with young men, who their abhorrence of the idea of taking a job they won't enjoy or won't feel fulfilled in.
Right. Exactly.
And I think about my grandparents who, they came out of the Great Depression, lived through World War II, and just put their heads down and did jobs to support their families. And I'm sure, my pop, I'm sure he found some pleasure in running a little sort of general store in small town South Carolina. He interacted with lots of colorful folks in that little town, but it was just day in, day out, stocking shelves, cashing people out, scheduling employees. I don't think it was fulfilling in that sense, but he was fulfilling his calling. Right. And I think that's hugely transformative. And I think if young people could get a hold of this, it would make such a difference. So, you said earlier, we're not here as a commercial for Trinity College. However, I think for young people, if there are high school students watching this, or even a student who's a year or two, maybe in the gen ed phase of freshman or early sophomore year, I don't know if everybody realizes that we offer 1 year of Trinity College. We call it the bridge year. And so students can come to Trinity College for 1 year. They can either do that in person or join with us remotely. And that 1 year is designed to equip students for their vocation later on. It's designed to give them a really solid foundation of Bible and theology and worldview and a sense of how do I discern God's guidance and God's calling in my life so that I can go into whatever it is he's called me to do. Maybe he's called you to study engineering or become an accountant or study, like become a nurse or something. And whatever that is, the bridge year is a great way to get started, to orient you to what has God called you to do. And then that can infuse everything else with so much more meaning and clarity and purpose. Right.
Exactly. Right. Because an understanding of calling isn't something that you get in 4 hours, right? It isn't, this is something, we talk about this a lot, but it comes from having your whole worldview shaped by, we have biblical anthropology and hermeneutics, to having just your whole mind shaped and heart shaped by thinking that is deeply rooted in Scripture. And that will change how you approach everything. But I love what you're saying about the fact that, yes, we're trying to prepare for faithfulness. It says it's good for the man to bear the yoke while he's young. And that's what young men need to get ready to do. This isn't, we go to 4 years of college to do something even more fun or be an instant success. That'll take, it'll take all kinds of forms. Who knows what happens? Some young people, you watch them, get a great job out of college and really rise up in what they're doing. And some struggle in that transition, or it takes a while. But I think that the more important thing is just where am I in terms of how I'm following the Lord. Because you've had a number of career shifts. You had a number of shifts in colleges that you attended, and then career shifts in your life. But the one thing that's been constant is you believe you are called by God to support and provide for your family. And that is something that has required great endurance at times in jobs you did not enjoy, that were even very difficult or just mundane, or not what you went to school for. Not one of the many schools and majors that you pursued. I'm not sure you've done much of anything that you actually studied in your early days of college.
But I think that's true actually for a lot for the statistics on that are really,
absolutely is true. You're just a really good example of what's very common. Right?
Yeah. Well, and that comes back around to just how When we moved here to Louisville so that I could attend seminary, and I needed a job, and I looked at, am I going to UPS or am I going to drive a bus?
Right.
I applied for that,
Right.
and then
Right.
found a job selling furniture. And selling furniture was fun. And I thought, there's a lot of overlap here. Pastoral ministry, it's about people. Selling furniture, it's about people. It's about listening well.
Handled
It's all
a
these
lot
things.
of conflicts.
Well, that was the thing, is then as I began gaining responsibility at that company, it was one thing when I could just go sell sofas, go home. That was great. And as I gained responsibility, then I got into more customer service stuff. And pretty soon my job was getting cussed out every day by angry employees, angry customers.
Right.
And that was not so pleasant. I didn't care for that as much. But it strikes me that, the Lord had prepared me. And the Lord used that to prepare me for other things too. Yeah. And so I think for the young people who are watching this, I think we would want them to know this doctrine of vocation, and getting clarity about your Christian calling. It will be so sustaining and so life-giving in nearly every area of life, whatever God has called you to. It will serve you to be aware that, this is what God has called you to right now, and to learn discernment, to say, well, where is God leading me? How do I know what that is?
And nothing is wasted.
Nothing is wasted.
So when you're getting, cussed out by a customer at whatever job you're working at, or you are nannying and it seems like it's just difficult and hard and you're not making much money, whatever you're doing right now, nothing is wasted. God is using all things, and he makes all things beautiful in his time. And that's, I think, a really encouraging thought to keep in mind.
Yeah. So that's from Ecclesiastes. He makes all things beautiful. And I think a way to, Romans 8:28 is a verse. We're too quick to slap it on to situations sometimes, but then people are like, hey, we're too quick to slap it on, and they don't use it at all. And this is a time where it's really good.
But it has the word calling in it.
God does work all things together for the good of those he loves and who are called according to his purpose. And so, so nothing is wasted, and we can recognize God's hand and God's guidance. So it's encouraging to think about, and I hope that young people take that to heart. And if they have questions, please send them in. We would love to speak directly to those questions. So it's probably a good place for us to wrap up. This content has all been sponsored by Trinity College of Louisville. We shape young men and young women for Christ and for the church, and people can learn more at trinitycollegelou.com.